we lecture to kids rather than to empower kids. It's their bodies, it's their brains. So we need to make sure that they are part of this. Cannabis has become so normalized that they don't realize that it is a drug.
You're listening to Parenting with Impact, the podcast for parents like you, raising complex kids to become capable, independent adults, even in this complicated world. Each episode brings expert insights and real-life strategies to help you parent with confidence, calm, and clarity. Here are your hosts, Elaine and Diane.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode in the Parenting with Impact podcast. I am here today with Dr. Yasmin Hurd, who is with the Eichmann School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and she's the director of Addiction Institute there and a professor of psychiatry and neuroscience. So, Yasmin, thank you for being here. Excited for this conversation. And I'm really not sure where we're going to go with it, but, talking about addiction and kids with complex issues is kind of important. So thanks for bringing your expertise. Can you start us off by just introducing yourself, the thumbnail of who you are, what you do, and how you came to be doing it? Why are you here talking about this issue?
So for me, I have always loved the brain. I was a weird child, and I didn't grow up in a family of physicians or scientists, but the brain was an essential part of our being and our behavior. And I just became fascinated with that. And today I'm a neuroscientist, and I study the neurobiology of substance use disorders. And another important thing about the work, I think, that how my research has evolved, it's really about what is relevant to the human condition. I'm very much interested in the fundamentals of how the brain works, but my research really is translational in terms of what are the things that we really see and that what do we need to impact. So for example, I started studying the human brain of people who had substance use disorders on a molecular level, which meant, unfortunately, studying people when they had died, because those are the techniques at molecular, that level that we look at. But it helped me to understand and to help guide our preclinical animal research in terms of what should be the questions that we're looking at. Similarly, in studying our human population, it was always what brought someone to this adult behavior, this adult disorder, and started looking at the developmental effects of different substances. And people had been looking at, for example, I was looking at a lot of, I should start off saying opioid users, because there's a high mortality with heroin, for example, now fentanyl and so on. And so majority of the people I was studying had opioid use disorder. And a lot of them didn't start off, obviously, with opioids. They started off with alcohol or tobacco, and those were being investigated. But they also talked about cannabis. And very few people were looking at cannabis and the potential developmental effects. And I started looking into that. And even though even my colleagues told me, why are you looking into something that's non-addictive? And even it was difficult to get some of our papers published to start. But that's the thing, in terms of trying to understand the trajectory to many disorders that we often think of as adult disorders, and especially in psychiatry, we now know that most psychiatric disorders are developmental in nature.
What does that mean?
Meaning that they start off during development. There's an early disorder, but it might get fully shown later in life. It's the early steps in how the brain is laid down. And I don't mean just in terms of prenatal, but during childhood and adolescence, because the brain is developing very rapidly until we're about mid-20s. And so a lot of things get integrated into that, the normal genetic blueprint that we have from our parents that we inherit. A number of things can also overlap there. And that's how I started looking into the developmental effects of cannabis. So in studying the human brain, in trying to understand the developmental impact of certain environmental things, just trying to get insights into what may be some of the neurobiological systems that we might be overlooking to be able to gain knowledge as to what sets vulnerability, but also what perhaps might help us to develop treatments. And so that's where a lot of my research focuses today.
Wow. All right. So many directions we could go here. And I'm always attentive, Yasmin, to kind of breaking it down and making sure we're kind of following the thread. So what I think I heard you say is, I kind of understand your fascination with the brain brought you into this arena, and that looking at what happened in the brain after people died to kind of look for markers or indicators that we could learn from in terms of substance use problems.
And it's also to help understand, are we developing treatments that are actually impacting on the neurobiological systems that are really characteristic of the brains, like I said, of people may have opiate use disorders or cocaine use disorders, and even for non-substance use, but in terms of other psychiatric conditions, that studying the human brain, I thought, was very important on a molecular level, because we know that psychiatric disorders, which is different from neurological disorders. Neurological disorders, you can see like there's structural changes in the brain. And often in
be like what?
If, for example, you have cells that die, you can have the cells die off, they shrink, things like that for different neurodegenerative disorders, Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's. But when we think of pure, a lot of psychiatric disorders, the reason why we haven't, people are like, oh, you should have figured this out already. Psychiatric disorders, we know it's not that there is clearly missing in the brain. It's about the function of the brain is different. And certain circuits in the brain are more compromised. And we know that it's on a very molecular and cellular level that this occurs. And that's why, to me, if we could study the brain on that more microscopic molecular level, that's why I thought if we studied the human brain in that way, we could try to understand more what may truly be the picture of the brain in this particular psychiatric condition, and then try to develop treatments that are more targeting that. So that's what I study in one aspect of my team. And we do clinical trials based on our molecular studies and trying to see, can these new strategies work? But in the other hand, I also look at what's the developmental trajectory that brought us there.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think what I'm hearing is that there's some of this is about what's happening in the brain, and some of this is about, I think what I heard you say is it's how the brain responds to what's happening in its environment and what's happening during the time of its development. And
exactly.
Not neonatal, but once the kid's here, right?
Yes.
It's how so just use me. I'm an adult with ADHD, right? My brain is wired in a certain way with ADHD. It's a neurobiological condition, so my brain functions somewhat differently from what might be considered neurotypical. And that I like the way you languaged it, that sometimes the circuits of the brain are a little different, or maybe even compromised. When it comes to memory, definitely compromised. And yet, it's about what happens in my environment as I was developing that may influence my relationship with, or the challenges I face with, substance use. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I will just say I'm not going to ignore prenatal, because we do know that prenatal exposure, we also study that prenatal exposure to cannabis. We can see increased anxiety, for example, in children. We can see different behaviors that relate to the prenatal exposure that we can actually replicate in our animal models. So we know that the prenatal time period is also important for later behaviors as well. So for me, it's the entire developmental trajectory. But often people, as a neuroscientist, we do put the developing brain in different time windows. But yeah.
Okay, so there's this influence. This is quintessential nature versus nurture, right? And you're looking at what is the nature, how is that influencing the fundamental brain that you're dealing with to see how that relates, it sounds like, to addiction specifically and more particularly to cannabis use.
Well, actually, to many substances, but in the context of development, I've focused on cannabis. But I don't look at it actually as nature versus nurture.
Okay.
They're together. And that's why on a molecular level, I study epigenetics. And epigenetics, even the regular lay person have heard perhaps that term now. Again, you inherit your DNA sequence from your parents, and it gives the blueprint. But actually, the environment can change if a gene that was supposed to be turned on is now turned off, and vice versa. Genes that should have been turned off are now turned on by the environment. So they work together, and we saw that developmental exposure to THC, for example, changed the epigenetics so that, and we can see it in the brain of adults with the developmental exposure to THC. And these epigenetic mechanisms set the situation. So, for example, I'll take our animal models. We can give prenatal exposure to THC to our rat model and study them in adulthood. They will go around and look normal. You stress them, just a minor stressor, their behavior changes. The only difference is that they had prenatal exposure to THC. And this is maintained by these epigenetic tags that we can see in the brains of these, like I said, for these adult animals with prenatal exposure to THC. So it is not nurture versus nature. We have to put them together. We are holistic beings. And as a holistic being, you have to appreciate that you didn't come into this world with a blank slate. You did not. You came into it with a number of things that gave you either risk or resilience to different things. We're not weak beings. We're not strong to be. We are all here with different strengths and quote unquote challenges. It's recognizing both of those to know. And some of us, for example, you can say, okay, I know that my uncle, aunts, everybody had an alcohol problem. I don't need someone to swipe my cheek and take my DNA to know that I might be at risk for having an alcohol use disorder. So I came predisposed, you could say, to this world. But it doesn't mean that's deterministic that I will inherit that.
Right.
So there are certain disorders, obviously, as we know, the genetic variant for Huntington's disease, you will get Huntington's disease no matter what happens in your environment during your childhood. So I'm not talking about those genetic disorders that are 100% penetrant. So it's important. I think the majority of us are not that. And we put everybody in these lumps and not realizing it's the holistic aspect you have to think about when we think about disease risk and treatment outcome. And not every person will respond to a particular treatment line because they are different, even if some of the quote unquote symptoms that we put in our diagnostic, you can check off those diagnostic criteria may fit, but there's a different underlying biology.
Beautiful. Okay, and we're going to take a quick break. What I have heard so far basically is that the notion of nature versus nurture, we're almost throwing it out and saying we can't look at nature without nurture and vice versa. They are integrated to be holistically to look at someone's health and trajectory and patterns and behaviors and processes. We have to always look at both.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick break and then we'll be back.
Do you recognize current ADHD interventions fall short? At Dig Coaching, we have developed a new field of engineering and a new ADHD intervention called cognitive ergonomics from the inside out. To learn more, go to digcoaching.com/impact.
Welcome back, everybody. My guest is Dr. Yasmin Hurd, and we're talking about the science of neurodegenerative disorders. Not neurodegenerative disorders, neurobiological conditions, substance abuse issues. Let's move into the work that you do, and kind of what you brought you here is to talk a little bit about cannabis in complex, what we call complex kids, complex brains, neurodiversity. What have you learned in the work that you've done that is important for us to begin to share with families and providers out there?
I overuse this word and I feel bad to overuse it, but it's complex. I don't study, I don't study all, how can I say, all these comorbid disorders that come in with cannabis use. But we do know that a lot of young people, I'm talking about teenagers, who feel that they have ADHD or other disorders, that they are quote unquote self-medicating it with cannabis. And this has become a huge issue because there's a lot of misinformation out there that, oh, cannabis can heal your, treat your ADHD, can treat your depression, it can treat your anxiety.
Right.
Yeah. And this is the issue. Cannabis as medicine may be there for certain medicines, and we have to be very clear. Medicine really is that it's gone through extensive research, FDA approval. We know the side effects, we know the dosing. Today, a lot of people are doing these experiments on their own, and they're using products that are not authorized by any federal organization. The only cannabis related, there are a few cannabis related products, but they are not for these disorders.
Yeah.
And we can see that there are many challenges that young people face. And the fact that cannabis today is now this high potency, highly engineered products. So earlier generations that experimented with cannabis, you were talking about in the 70s, hippies were 2 to 4% THC, then it became, 5 to 10. Today we're talking about cannabis products that are, you can even have, products that the flower is over 24%. The flower you can have when you're smoking, the joints and so on, or I should actually come to like the concentrates of the vaping, the dabs that will give you even 90% THC. It's not the same drug. There is no way that today the products that the teenagers are using are the same as what their parents might have, experimented with. And also, many of them were experimenting in college or smoking a joint in a high school and some giggling together in, one joint that we're smoking. Today, these high potency, high impact that get into the brain rapidly, they blow out the brain. That is not the original plant that was made in terms of THC. They're doing it, they're consuming whole, products by themselves and the edibles and so on. We have more kids going to the emergency room today than we've ever had. We have higher amounts of psychosis related to cannabis, increase mental health. Mm-hmm.
So let me interrupt you because I want to, because you're debunking a lot of myths, but I don't want people to lose the construct here, right? So what I think I'm hearing you saying is, we're not raising kids in the world we were raised in. The cannabis they're smoking is not the cannabis of the 70s and the 80s. And one of the big, and you and I were talking earlier about, the way this came into the market and how difficult it is to manage because this is a business.
Yes.
And so I remember when my kids were in high school and trying to have some cogent conversations with them about what cannabis is today versus what it was. And for every argument I could find about the dangers, they were going to be able to find me an argument about the benefits of it. At least I had them doing some research.
Right. And that's what you should do.
Right.
You need to empower. We lecture to kids rather than to empower kids.
Yes.
It's their bodies, it's their brains. So we need to make sure that they are part of this. But, our society today, for them, cannabis has become so normalized that they don't realize that it is a drug. They say that, oh, it's better than alcohol, mom, right? oh, it's not going to give me the lung cancer as smoking cigarettes, but it's actually have a bigger impact on the on the mental health of kids than either of those other drugs. So it's the mental health issues that are the big issue, things that needs to be addressed.
So let's talk about that because again, in my day, the message was you can't get addicted to marijuana.
Right.
Nowadays, I get that it's a different marijuana, but I also think the message is no longer but that the addiction is different. So can you talk a little bit about what is the relationship between marijuana and addiction? And let's start with that. And then, and we don't have a lot of time, but then I want to take that and talk about, what are the things parents should be aware of?
That's the biggest myth, that you can't get addicted to cannabis. That myth has been debunked by numerous studies. At least, and this is a low level, at least 1 in 6 young people will develop a cannabis use disorder. And even for those individuals that don't meet the clinical diagnosis for a cannabis use disorder, many of them, there's now the new term non-disordered cannabis use disorder, because they are still impaired in certain mental health issues. They're still impaired in their academic performance. They still have challenges. I shouldn't say impaired. They have challenges in these areas versus kids who don't use. So we know that that is an issue and you can't ignore it. But addiction is like any other substance. For cannabis, they crave it. People, and a lot of parents don't realize, because they're not able to smell these new products. These kids are vaping and dabbing high concentrations, not once a day, multiple times a day. Their parents don't even realize it. There are synthetic products that are put out there purposely. They say, oh, it's not THC. In a lot of the states where cannabis is still illegal, the industry has made these like Delta 8 THC and these semi-synthetic products very addictive still. So it breaks my heart that teens today are being manipulated and using old cannabis, data, and using old cannabis information as this is a reality today. We have today, in the dual diagnosis wars in many places around the country, a large percentage of young people, teens and young adults, that are psychotic because of cannabis. We have in the emergency department many people coming in with hyperemesis, vomiting, throwing up because of cannabis. We have children and toxicity in the emergency department because of cannabis. It is not the same drug. And when teens tell you that it is, you have to, tell them to look into more recent literature. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And we'll put some links in here. So some of the symptoms that people should be wary of, I've just heard you say, is a craving for it. There's sometimes excessive vomiting. If there's, what are some of the other signs that parents might look for to recognize?
So, I think the one thing about teenagers, as many parents with cannabis use, is that he's trying to distinguish it from the normal, like very emotional teens, or the teens that will go into their rooms and close their doors and not want to talk with you for days. But it's really, again, the change in behavior, a change in the friends, the change in, all of these things start to tell you something is wrong. And for cannabis addiction, prevention and early intervention is critical. For trying to diminish the mental health comorbidity that we see with cannabis use, early intervention, prevention. You see teens that their, depression goes up. It's also important to give kids their space. So it is important to have open discussion. And because indeed cannabis is legal in many states, and like you had Elaine, the conversation with your kids when they were teenagers, it's the same thing, to make sure that you're not being judgmental, because you need honesty and openness. And it's not tell them you can't do this, but it is to start providing them with the facts, because they're going to indeed come back at you with alternative facts that are not factual at all. And this thing about wanting to, alcohol versus tobacco, I always tell people, it's like, or is it worse that it's like jumping? Do you prefer to jump off the third floor or the fourth floor of a building? They're all dangerous. It's just, yeah, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. So what you're saying is the earlier intervention, the better likelihood of preventing any kind of adverse mental health outcomes. So what are the adverse mental health outcomes? I heard you say depression. What
Psychosis is one of the biggest that we see, especially with these I'm sorry?
What is psychosis? It's a term that's bandied around, but, medical professional, what does it actually mean?
So people can think of, someone is delusional. They hear things. They have a disconnect from reality. We have young people, their parents are with the CIA and they're out to kill them. We have people who are suicidal, and the suicidal ideation, and actually, unfortunately, the suicidal completion is because a lot of times they're paranoid that somebody is coming to get them. They're trying to bring themselves to safety and will jump. It's not that they were depressed at that time. And so paranoia is a huge aspect. And so the psychosis, the disconnect from reality, as I said, also the suicidal behavior. And what people don't understand in young people is that often a lot of people with these, atypical disorders, they have high anxiety and want to fit in to their, with their peers. But the more you take cannabis, you become more anxious. And so it exacerbates the anxiety disorder, which feeds into that they need more cannabis, because they think, okay, when they consume cannabis, it relaxes them, but it does more. And this is the thing as well, sleep. Another thing is trying to help your teen in a healthy way to sleep. A lot of them start using cannabis for quote unquote helping with sleep. Parents don't realize that's what they're doing right before bed. So it is, before you even start the conversation about cannabis, what are some of the healthy ways to deal with sleep, healthy ways to deal with anxiety? Those conversations should start even before they become teens.
Yeah. So I feel like I could talk to you for hours. We need to start wrapping this conversation. Y'all will get some more resources for you. Again, Dr. Yasmin Hurd is with the Eichmann School of Medicine at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. And she's promised me she's going to send me some links so that we can have a place to direct you to if you're concerned, if you'd like more. And I know that we have in our community, parents come to us with lots of concerns. And this is certainly one of them is, there's smoking so much weed and I just don't know how to get them to stop, or I don't know how to talk to them about it. And we do a lot of work with parents about how do you get to the point where you can have those conversations. And so this is, a reminder that as you said, lecturing them isn't going to do anything, but being in a collaborative conversation with them where there's trust and safety allows you to begin to challenge and have different kinds of conversations. So that's just a reminder for the community. Before we wrap this conversation, is there anything else do you feel like we haven't talked about that you want to make sure you talk about before we close?
One quick thing. Cannabis, we have used the term very generally. And I mentioned delta-8 THC before, but there are a lot of misunderstanding about CBD, which is cannabidiol, because people think, hemp, that's safe, but they have used the hemp to make intoxicating cannabinoids. CBD is actually, we're even studying CBD as a potential treatment for opioid addiction. Started with our animal models again before anybody even knew what CBD was, but it has a different effect than THC. CBD might decrease anxiety, but you need research, and we're still not there to say that CBD is FDA approved for anxiety disorders. And so cannabis is a complex plant, but THC is the culprit for the mental health and even physical disorders that we see. And we also see that the younger people start, the more the mental health challenges. So even having your teen, the conversation of starting later, it's a huge difference to the brain. The data does not lie. More and more studies, sadly, because more states, a recent study in Canada just came out showing the same exact thing when they had, these longitudinal studies. Early use of cannabis is the culprit.
When you say early, what are you talking about?
Usually, often, people start before 15, 16 years old. But the cutoff sometimes they vary depending on how the study design was. But clearly, early before mid-teens, and a lot of kids are starting 11, 12 years old today. So that is
how strong it is and how young that is. It's
exactly. It's scary. It should be scary for everyone.
Oh, but I heard you say, and this is really important to hit home, is what you're really talking about that's dangerous is THC. And that there are a lot of components to cannabis, some of which that could actually prove to be useful over time.
Yes.
CBD can be, we might find out that that's going to be a treatment to navigate the challenges of the THC. So it's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, if you will, but it's really, we need more research. We need to understand better the nuances and the intricacies of what we're dealing with this.
Yeah, and the high THC will never be a medicine. It doesn't. It just knocks the brain and the body to a manner that will never be a medicine.
Is it once these mental health conditions or challenges are generated, whether it's anxiety or depression, are they reparable?
So this is one of the great things about epigenetics. If it's epigenetic, it has the potential to be reversible. You can't change your DNA sequence, but the epigenetic tags that are put on, we know that they're reversible. So yes, and you don't need, there are many different things we don't have enough time that can reverse, epigenetic perturbations, but it can take time depending on how early the person may have started. And there are things that will always trigger your brain. And we still haven't yet figured out, especially, for example, those individuals who then ultimately have schizophrenia and so on, how to, get back to zero. But we do know that when they stop using cannabis, they get back to, quote unquote, a normal life of some normality. And it takes time.
Right. Well, and the only other thing there's so many other things I would love to talk about. The other thing I want to say here is that it's very difficult to find places that will do treatment for cannabis, that there's a lot of inpatient and outpatient treatment programs that will deal with all kinds of substance use problems, but it's very difficult for parents to find resources to get support for cannabis use. So any thoughts or is there anything you can share with us that we can share on that?
I think it's improving. I think that many people, our field, we are also with that, both clinical and research, we underestimated how fast the cannabis industry would grow with limited resources to specifically target cannabis use disorder. And so many programs are developing. So a lot of today, we know that behavioral interventions are the primary treatment for cannabis use disorders. It's behavioral. We do not have any pharmacological treatments as yet. And a lot of these behavioral programs, they're also in a process of figuring out what really does work.
Yeah.
So it's a process. We're talking about, it's a process. And that is why we're in unfortunately, a really tough time where the perfect storm of we don't yet have the full resources in place clinically to address the barrage of cannabis use medical issues that are coming up, and especially among young people.
Yeah,
especially among young people. So we need a lot of unique programs and for different coaching therapists and so on are being developed. But today it's mainly behavioral, and there are few places that do it, really well.
Yeah. Yeah. So we will pull whatever resources we can find, everybody. Those of you who are in the community, these are issues that we do talk about in office hours and in our Lifeline community, because it does come up, and we have a lot of parents in our community whose kids have been dealing with it, have gone through programs. And as you say, one of the things I've witnessed is that when you're able to interrupt, that in our experience, coaching is a great modality that can really help people recenter themselves, reground themselves, and be able. It doesn't always have the same lasting damage, with exceptions of things like schizophrenia, obviously.
Yeah.
So this sounds like it's a scary conversation. I guess I want to leave us with a reminder that there's also hope. That when we build trust, when we build relationship, when we get connected and in relationship with our kids, we can begin to have these really important conversations to begin to shift the nature of what's happening when this is going on for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this. Before we check off, any favorite quote or motto that's kind of come to you since we've had this conversation?
It's funny because now I think that one of my favorite books is The Alchemist. And there is a quote, there are many quotes, but one is like, the secret of life is to fall 7 times and to get up 8 times. And so you can't give up hope for your kids, for anything. So that I think is one of my favorites.
I love that. The secret of life is to fall 7 times and to get up 8 times. That speaks to this community so beautifully. Thank you. I love that. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for taking the hits with colleagues when they don't think it's important and pushing to make sure that you're doing the really valuable work, because it really is important. And we need you out there doing that work. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
We appreciate it. To those of you listening, take a minute, check in. I know there's been a lot of conversation here, some of which has been probably a little triggering or stressful for you. But, take the deep breath, let it out, and ask yourself, what were you paying attention to in this conversation? Like, what's the one, maybe it's a particular kid or a particular dynamic or a co-parent. Like, what are you paying attention to? And what's your one insight? What are you taking away from this that you might want to bring forward with you into your life this week? Just one thing. Don't try to overwhelm yourself. Maybe there's one conversation you want to think about. How to have more constructively than you have in the past? And as always, friends, remember, you make a huge difference. What you do matters. How you think about it, how you talk about it, how you be with it. It matters profoundly. So thanks for being here, for being part of this conversation, for carrying it forward. And we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.